So my name's Sanjay and I'm the Community Engagement Manager from the National Flood Forum, and I'm just going to go a little bit through what we do, the National Flood Forum, and how we support communities at flood risk, and some of the kind of things around what flooded communities across England and Wales go through and how we can support, and some of the things that we do to kind of advise and help you through that. And then please do fire any questions at the end as well. I'm going to kind of go a little bit through, effectively the presentation is going to be about the focus on flooded people. So it's going to be on what people go through, the issues that they face. Some of you in this room will know that quite clearly, and I apologise if I bring up some things or some issues that kind of take you back to those dark times, but I think it's very, very important that we stress this, because one of the things about flood risk management is we talk about systems and about behaviours and interests, but what we've got to remember is at the end of this, who is suffering from the flooding, and it's the flooded people. So actually what's quite interesting is I threw this flooding facts out, and actually the first one's actually wrong now. I just saw from the previous presentation it's now 1 in 4 homes. So it's quite interesting to see this 1 in 6 homes was taken in 2014. So actually in the prevailing time, even through all the information and all the work that we're doing to prevent and to reduce flood risk, that statistic has actually gone up now. So it's now 1 in 4 homes at serious risk of flooding. So that's quite interesting in the kind of scenario we find ourselves in. So probably the bottom next number is out of date as well, but roughly it's going to be over 5.2 million households that are at risk and have either experienced flooding, may experience flooding, or have flooded multiple times. If you split that out-of-date figure up, you've got over nearly 2.5 million properties at risk from flooding from rivers or sea. And actually one of the kind of key things that have happened in the last few years that we've been seeing at the National Flood Forum is that a lot of properties are now experiencing surface water flooding. So large-scale urban areas are also finding that their risk of flooding is increasing. What's interesting as well is, again, in 2014, so this we know at the National Flood Forum has changed, but 55% of those living in flood risk areas know they are at risk. Well, actually, since then, there's quite a lot of people that we work with and support that didn't know they were at flood risk and actually are finding it difficult to access information and what they need to do as well. So as I mentioned, I really want to focus on the impacts that flooding causes on people. It's really, really important to understand that there are health impacts on people who have been flooded, who have suffered flooding, and there has been some research done into this. There was also a study done by Public Health England, which was originally meant to be a 10-year study, but it was cut down to 3. I don't know why, but I would have thought it's really interesting to find out what happens to people once they've been flooded. And one of the key issues after someone who's been flooded is actually you're 6 to 7 times more likely to experience post-traumatic stress disorder. So you are constantly in a state of distress, especially when it comes to things such as flood warnings, flood alerts. You are constantly worrying about the next time it's going to happen. You are worried for your family, you're worried for yourself. Sometimes you feel there's an overwhelming burden on what's going to happen to you. And again, some research that the Environment Agency did showed that out of the people that they interviewed and looked at this, 20% of their sample size, I've yet to try and get the full number of people that they actually did interview and study for this, but out of their sample size, 20% said that they suffered from long-term depression after a flood event. 28% of their sample size said that they suffer from anxiety on a daily basis, and 36% said they were affected by post-traumatic stress disorder. So again, I apologise to the people in this room who have probably felt that, who have gone through a flood event, but it's really important to put this into perspective when we're talking about how we think about resilience and what flooded people go through. Again, impact of flooding, and this was quite a hard-hitting fact as well. Impact of flooding is most acutely experienced in vulnerable neighbourhoods, the most vulnerable. I will leave links for Tia to send out as well at the end, but there is a website by an organisation called Climate Just that shows how disproportionately those most vulnerable areas within the UK suffer quite badly from the flooding because of multiple factors, including socio-economic, access to funding either through state level or their own personal funding that they can have to implement things such as property flood resilience. And again, those vulnerable neighbourhoods are significantly overrepresented in coastal flooding areas. You had the talk earlier about the flooding history that we looked at through the 40s and 50s. Some of those coastal defences are now, or continuously since the 50s, having to be topped up, maintained, because again, those people are at most risk. But actually in those areas, because of other factors as well, those areas are quite overrepresented in how vulnerable they are to that flooding. So it's really, really important that we understand that when you are communicating, or when agencies and authorities are talking to flooded people, or that we are engaging with yourselves who are flooded, or people who engage with are flooded, it's very important to remember this is not just something that happens to a person's property, it happens to them, and it is very important to remember that. What are the things that you go through as a flooded person? And again, I apologise to people who have gone through this, but there are multiple host of things that go on from the moment you get that flood warning to the moment the waters recede, and the moment, for example, your insurance claim kicks in, from the moment it takes you to recover. Now, we know at the National Flood Forum, on average, it takes anywhere between 6 to 18 months for somebody to get back into their property. And that's not then taking into account the recovery period in terms of the recovery of your mental kind of state and how you feel about living back in a property that's flooded. So you are constantly thinking about future costs. You're thinking about the impact on your health, on your family's health. We have had multiple cases where people have felt suicidal, where people feel that they cannot carry on. The real big worry that we find for people that we speak to is having to go through it all over again. So actually we find that people who have flooded do always remember that it's there as a constant worry. It is something that will never go away for them, even if they have done anything or everything that they can do. The value of their home, the value of your property, you're worried, are you able to sell it? Are you able to make any improvements to it? Because what is the point if it's going to be flooded again? Every time it rains, as I've mentioned, I have people today, so apologies, sometimes you might have seen me on the phone, I have people constantly messaging me saying, I've just got a flood warning, I've seen a cloud outside my window, what's going to happen? It's very, very important to remember that this is something that is in the back of people's minds. That feeling of being trapped, some people, especially a lot of the times in those vulnerable areas, or areas with high social vulnerability, a lot of their assets are based in their home. So they're asset rich but cash poor. So they feel trapped. They can't sell that property, or we get daily calls saying, I'm really worried, I'm trying to sell my property. Should I tell if I'm at flood risk? I've been flooded, what do I do? Again, the loss of personal possessions, the cost to the individual, to their family. Number 9, it's really important that it's quite positive that we hear from Flood Re and from the insurance industry that getting affordable insurance is getting better. But again, we on a regular basis push back and show Flood Re that there are still cases where people have loopholes and slip through the gaps, and we need to make sure that those people are also represented and are helped. And again, finally, all these worries that you are having can be a continuous time. And then you also have to live your life, the impact on your job, the impact on your children, the impact on the people that you are having to go through this as well. So it's that effective loss of control. It's that not being able to position yourself in what you do and how you're going to manage it. And it's very, very important that, for example, we at the National Flood Forum say that you have to maintain that this is what a person goes through, not just multiple people or a flooded property. Sorry to hit you with the kind of hard, kind of really distressing points at the beginning, but I think there is understanding, and we look at the flood and coastal risk management strategy that was published, and we look at the future aspirations and what we need to do and how we can make sure that communities are invested and communities are part of that process. Obviously, in the last kind of 6-year period, there was lots of things done. There was lots of positives of investment, where the investment went, how much was contributed using that multi-agency approach, which was very popular. And I think it's really good to see that after 2007, as mentioned before, the PIT review talked about how agencies and authorities in flood risk management have to come together. They have to be able to work on that multi-level approach. Why is it needed? Well, one thing we haven't really mentioned today, but it's kind of there as the thing in the background, is the ever-changing climate, the increase in these extreme weather events. It's not going to get better, it's going to get worse. You've got, as we mentioned, projections up to 2050 of more of these events, sea level rise. We've just been through a kind of period where we've had extremes in weather within the summer. A lot of people that we work with, they normally are understanding of what they call flood season. They know kind of roughly when they're ready to expect that. But recently we've seen multiple events throughout the year. So it's quite important that that strategy does bed down what we need to do to tackle this. I think for us at the National Flood Forum, what's really important of that strategy is the forward planning and actually helping think about the community response and engaging and talking to people who are flooded, ready to respond. So actually, how do we make the emergency response better? How do we make sure that community groups, such as the one this morning from Alconbury, have that across the board? So how do we make sure that not only is it about community resilience, but those communities are supported by that emergency response, that training is there, making sure those communities feel confident and secure that everything outside of their own control is being worked on. But I think one thing that's really important is we talk about the aftermath and how the building back and how making sure that people recover better. Well, one of the things that's really important about that is how do we help people through that recovery process? Because actually a real key part of resilience is how do you recover and how do you maintain your kind of focus and feeling that it's not going to happen again. We're currently doing some research as well, and there's been research done recently about the word resilience. And actually there's a bit of a fatigue at the moment with resilience. People are kind of sick and tired of the word resilience, because what does resilience mean? How do I become more resilient? If you've been flooded 2 or 3 times, you will pretty much know how to become resilient yourself effectively. So how do we make the systems in place to make you more effective and make that resilience better around you? So there's a huge challenge as well, looking at a kind of policy and a governmental level, which the National Flood Forum also try and make sure, as Flood Re mentioned, we tried really hard before the inception of Flood Re, we lobbied as well, and we tried to support the inception of that to make sure that the industry was looking at how people were suffering in insurance and how they were finding it after a flood event. But the challenge hasn't stopped. There are many challenges we have to think about at that macro level. Repairing roads, walls and bridges. Our infrastructure needs a huge boost to the system. A lot of the time that we work with flooded communities and areas, a lot of the time the infrastructure is, the feeling amongst communities is that needs a lot of investment and work. How do we maintain continuity of services? I think it's brilliant that Cambridgeshire County Council have these sessions with you, that they have a flood risk management team that have an arm that's dedicated to working with communities, because again, we see this a lot across England and Wales, is that continuity of services, that reduction in services because of budgets being slashed is quite important, because that continuity of servicing enables it to be more engaged with those communities. What do we need to provide short term, longer term, and also looking at how, as I go back to the recovery, those rehousing or displaced residents from a flood, how do they get back to the normality of before what happened to them? And again, the final thing, which is really, really important, is communicating progress and development. So these are huge challenges across at a governmental level, and we need to push this. And the only way we do that is through the voices of your communities, actually. We need that people power to feed back up to those institutions that set these kind of challenges and how they're going to fix them. Who is the National Flood Forum? Who are we? And what do we do? So we're a national charity. The National Flood Forum actually started 20 years ago, and we were actually started by a community group in Bewdley. So community members in Bewdley had got to the point where they were flooded quite badly, flooded regularly, and they found that there was no effective communication back in 1999-2000 to kind of look at how they were going to solve that situation and have solutions to the problem that they had. And we've kind of grown since then, and one of the key things that community initially did was they formed what they called a flood action group. And what that flood action group really did was maintain that regular communication, that regular partnership work with those flood risk management authorities. Now, across England and Wales, we have over 420 flood action groups that we support, work with, and are affiliated to the National Flood Forum. Scotland has its own Scottish Flood Forum, so sorry if you're wondering why I kept saying England and Wales, but we do liaise with them as well. So the kind of three key tenets that we do is we help people prepare for flooding, so we have advice on what to do before, during and after, and I'll again leave links where you can find free information for you, whether that's practical tips, advice. We also, one of the key things we do, and we are one of the only charities that do this, is we go in straight after an event and help people with our recovery service. So what we do is we go into the heart of the community that's flooded, and we go in with our flood recovery trailer there just to kind of help support people as they go through these traumatic experiences. So it's not just about the practical support and help, it's actually being there to help people emotionally as well, because one of the things, as I mentioned in earlier slides, access to mental health support for people who've been flooded is almost non-existent. So one of the things that we really try and push is help people recover and get back to some kind of normality after they've been flooded. We also have an independent directory of PFR products. So some of the information you've heard from the other speakers today, if you have any more advice or information you like about that, it's essentially like the yellow pages, so you can go on there and you can search multitudes of different products. You can also have a look at, are there any of those independent surveyors if you're looking to take the cost on yourself of surveying your property for PFR. But we give non-committal, so we don't endorse, or we don't say please go to this one. We have no skin in the game, so you're more than welcome to come and have a chat with us as well. And I think the one thing that I'm going to talk about before I finish really quickly is we do work to ensure that flooded risk communities are at the centre of that policy making and operational delivery. We head up the APPG for flooding. So what we do is all the flood action groups that we talk to and give us their information and their worries and the things that they would like pushed at that level, we make sure it goes through that APPG, and that we make sure. We also sit on the PFR round table to make sure that those residents and communities like yourselves who have your feedback on your PFR experience are also heard and listened to. But for us, the main purpose of what we do is empowering communities. We are an organisation that was created by flooded people, and we know massively and very strongly that the best way that you tackle and you work forward your flood risk is in partnership, but partnership requires empowerment, building those strong foundations. Your communities, you have the knowledge, you have the history, you have the understanding of what has happened to you. You need that voice. Giving that voice to flooded people is what's really important to us. That vision and leadership doesn't come from the National Flood Forum, it comes from those communities who are flooded. And it's your agenda, it's the things that you as a community feel need to happen. And that goes through every level, from the ground up all the way to government. What you want to say to those people, we push. And that's why for us, we're an organisation where people matter. I'm not here to spout why we're great. I'm here to say these are the groups that we work with. If it wasn't for these people, if it wasn't for yourselves who are flooded, National Flood Forum wouldn't be here. It's actually the people who make the difference. And something to bear in mind at the moment as well is because we are going through many other things as well, and those flooded people are still at the forefront of that, making decisions that we make. So for us, our key tenet of what we do is, as I mentioned, we have over 420 flood action groups across England and Wales, and one of the things we really espouse and try and support and help you with is setting up and helping you with a flood action group. And as you've heard brilliantly at the start of today, why a flood action group is important. It brings your community together, it brings those flooded people together with a purpose. It's working within that collective partnership and actually making decisions with those people in flood risk. That's really key. Partnership is important here. It's not about dissemination of information and discussing what will be done. It's about what you think should be done as a flooded community. Also, flood action groups prepare, support, help the impact on their home and community. Who knows better what it's like to go through a flood than a flooded person? And also what's really important is those flooded people and community come together and bring the local voluntary support. It's that community collective action that's really, really important. And that can go from a whole list of things, of solutions to future problems, and also supporting community emergency flood plans. So this is just a kind of snapshot of what flood action groups do. Flood action groups, again, know their area. Most people in flood action groups, you will have people that have lived there for many, many years. They have historical knowledge. they have understanding of their area, they know the topography, they know where the flooding has happened, where it's happened before, and that information is gold dust to flood risk management authorities. A lot of theoretical modelling done on flood risk is done on the basis of information in equals information out, and who better to give that information than people who've lived there a long time and know the area. So that's where they coordinate, that's where they look at solutions. What do you think as a flood action group is the best solution? So you will have long-term, you will have short-term, you'll have community-led schemes, and at each stage of this, a flood action group is present and part of that decision-making. And that for us is really, really important, that collaboration. Community should be at the heart of that collaboration. It shouldn't be a top-down approach. Nothing should ever be dictated or directed to you. You should work together, and that empowerment through that collaboration brings that collective voice. You have resources, you have expertise, you bring the right people together, you make sure that the focus is solely on your flood risk. And flood action groups really feel strong that they should be involved in anything related to flood risk, from its inception, from what they think works, to what you know. So that's what we talk about in partnership. And it's not just about being informed of what's happening, it's not just about the long-term plans and how we're going to implement them. What it should be is you as a flooded community, as a flood action group, should be included in the shaping and direction of those projects. Because at the end of the day, once those projects are finished, that flood action group, that community is going to live with the consequences of what's gone on. And that for us is really important. And actually, the reason I put this photo up is, some of these photos, is that these flood action groups got together and they decided that they can do some decisive action. So again, we go back to the discussion of resilience. Now, a community is only resilient when it knows it's working in partnership. There are things you can and cannot do as a community, and there are things that you can do. So let's focus on the things that we can do together, but how do we make sure that the people above do actually listen to you? And that's that community collective voice. And that's why it's really important that whatever you do as a flood action group, you do it as a collective, because that does raise the profile of your area, that raises the profile of your voice. And actually, it's really important that this community was brilliant. The reason I put that picture up with our now departed Chancellor is because what was really funny when they met him was they had every information about what was the issue in their area. They didn't want their Member of Parliament to just discuss or relay that information. They wanted change. They knew what solutions they needed, and they knew what that needed to be done at that parliamentary level. Other flood action groups we work with, so in Worcestershire recently, an area called Tenbury Wells, flood action group there. Again, they've been through the process of collaborative working, partnership working, and the big problem that community faced was we don't have enough money. So they went to their MP, and their MP did not stop raising it in the chamber, and eventually they got some funding. So if you ever feel that there's an issue that money is the object, well, actually a flood action group can find ways to eke out from the magic money tree some extra bits of money as well. And I think that's the key thing as well, that working together is really important. We've talked about the different schemes on offer. In the last talk, Floodry mentioned very importantly, not one solution will solve everything. So we cannot just focus on one specific set of flood risk measures. You have to think of the whole. And what you need to do is bring every part of that community and that aspects of different partnership working together. So we worked on a Slow the Flow project, it was called, in Shropshire. It was funded through local levy, so through the English and 7Y RFCC. So again, that's another avenue as communities you discuss with those committees about community level action. Brought all these various partnerships together because, as you can see, they all needed to be invested, from local landowners to the community that it affected. And what they did was they came together and they worked on this project to see within their catchment where could these interventions be put to help the flood risk. And the real driver of that collaboration, the real driver of bringing all those people together, all those different authorities, all those landowners, were those flood action groups. So those flood action groups came together and realised it cannot just be a single voice, it needs to be a collaborative partnership. As you go through your flood risk and some of the issues you have, flood action groups can actually point out the key issues, they can identify the issues that need rectifying, they can input into these projects, and they can also conduct events. So again, we've heard some really good stuff today as well about those practical things on the ground you can do as a community. But again, those are done in conjunction with other multiple projects going on. Otherwise, a community collaboration doesn't work because you are not feeling that it's working in partnership with everybody else who should also be looking at the wider flood risk. Sorry that this is a bit of a wordy slide, but one of the things that we also try to do, as I mentioned, is try and capture the feeling of flooded people across the country. What we want to do is say to the powers that be, this is what people who are flooded want to know. This is what is affecting them. This is the things that you need to think about when you are directing policy, you are directing legislation, and you are changing law, because actually, who is it going to benefit? It has to benefit those flooded people. So a lot of people feel out of control when they've been through a flood. A lot of flood action groups tell us that they feel things are arranged for them. There's a disjointed approach, that they don't have the detail they need. They often find that sometimes, especially recently, there's a lot of anger and frustration because of a lot of mixture of things. People are under continued strain. And again, what they want to understand is, what is the whole picture? So things like adding PFR is a continual reminder that it's going to happen again. They understand it's needed. They understand it's part of the solution. But what they do not want it to be is the only thing that they will know that they're going to get as a solution to their flood risk. And this is really, really important, is that it's not that they don't want certain things, it's not that they don't understand, but a lot of flood action groups we talk to in flooded communities want to know that they've had a chance to make that decision as well, that they've had a chance to understand what they would like and where it's going to go. So actually what's quite important coming to us at the moment is we're actually trying to commission government to do research into the behaviour of flood risk management, not the behaviour of people, because actually the behaviour of flooded people shouldn't be under strain, because those people are affected very badly by certain events. As a flood action group, and again touching on this morning's excellent presentation, is that as a flood action group you will start to understand some of the schemes through the partnership working you're doing. What is the difference between a rural scheme and urban scheme? Who needs what, how much time is it going to take, what's the time length? Even as a flooded person, a lot of flood action groups we work with tell us, I do understand, I am anxious, but if I know that there's a time frame to this, we will work together with you. We will know how long it takes. How much is it going to cost? What's the meaning of certain things? What does sustainable urban drainage mean? Or what does urban drainage systems mean as well? A lot of the time now, especially in areas, we're trying to look at how we can support the system, make it better, look through things such as sustainable drainage. Nature-based solutions is very important at the moment as well. A lot of information and research done on that. But again, the key point of these slides is to show you that it's got to be a holistic approach. It cannot be one size fits all. It has to be done together. And what's really important is as well is now a lot of flood risk management work is looking at the catchment-based approach. So actually looking at your catchment as a whole and looking at how you can stop sources of water further up before it actually gets to you. Just to finish on this is that engagement, partnership, leadership, all of these words should be able to include the communities and make sure that they play a role in this. As in your workplace, everybody has different skills, everybody has different experiences, but again, you have to bring them together to try and find the best solution. Involvement doesn't just mean simple solutions on the ground as a community, it means galvanizing, it means building partnerships, it means innovation. And it requires everybody to work together as equals. It has to be participatory. It cannot just be implemented or prescriptive, because that will not work. And there shouldn't be knowledge hierarchies. There shouldn't be it should be an information exchange, but also a chance to discuss, disseminate, and talk about that information, not just saying, this is what's going to happen, and this is how it's going to happen. So effectively, if you've got any more questions, happy to take them. I will leave a lot of information that I mentioned about the blue pages, about our website, and if you need to get in touch. And again, if there's any other thing you would like to know, a lot of communities like to touch bases with each other as flood action groups. I'm more than happy to talk to you as well afterwards. Thank you.